we see our roasters with the diversity of roasters that we have, where a roaster doesn't have the financial stability to actually survive and to continue purchasing coffee because they haven't adjusted their planning, their forecasting, their budgeting, and their base, then they get called out when they're, in a scenario where they are falling back on maybe a spot market or something they require and they physically do not have the liquidity to do that. Then they get acquired by a larger roaster which has the ability to do that. So we're seeing consolidation in that space. I think consolidation is also being seen in cafes, particularly in Australia, where, you'd have 20 cafes on a street because everyone would set them up. But when times get hard, pressure gets hard, cost of living gets hard, inflation goes up, if you didn't have the right foundation and the right budgeting and the right structure, then you will be consolidated. So we're seeing consolidation across the board in the coffee supply chain. And I wholeheartedly believe that is detrimental to the longevity, the diversity, and the overall benefit of our supply chain from both sides.
This episode is proudly brought to you by Mapper Forward's workshop, It's Time to Become a Coffee Consultant. Learn how to diversify your revenue streams and create freedom from your day job while saying goodbye to that alarm clock forever by becoming a consultant within the coffee industry or directly to consumers who have shifted towards home brewing and home roasting. Protect your income from challenging times in the coffee value chain by taking this course today. Go to mapperforward.coffee/workshops or click the link in the show notes for details. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is unfortunately episode 5 of a 5-part series of what has been a delightful conversation. Caleb, thank you. It's been really a joy having this conversation.
I appreciate appreciate the chance to chat to everyone.
Thank you, mate. Thank you. And speaking of everyone, folks, if you enjoy what we do on the podcast, I would encourage you to support what we're doing because we have made a commitment now to leave the podcast sponsor free, which means that any revenue that we could make of bringing sponsors onto the podcast, which is a lot of money, we've decided that typically what happens, because people who sponsor the podcast would like to, never anyone we've had previously as sponsors on the podcast, but these days people find a lot of the stuff that we talk about a little bit, I don't know what the right word to use it to describe it is, but they would like to control the content. So we have decided that we're going to protect the sanctity of being able to speak whatever we know is going on. And so we no longer will entertain those conversations. So if you would like to support this podcast and, extend the life of this podcast, as they say, please join us on Patreon or join our paid membership on YouTube. The other thing is just share the podcast and help us spread the word of it. We are, there was a time in my career when I was launching Elixir and things like that where people were quite not nice and could be quite aggressive. I'm really proud to say that the people who listen to this podcast are just really, really lovely and very supportive of what we're doing. And that makes me really proud. It tells me that we're changing as an industry to be more supportive of each other. And I'm very grateful for that. So, thanks to everybody for how much you support what we're doing. I'm very proud of what we do and how we're kind of finding people who are like-minded, like Caleb. It really is. I know that you're in business to make money, and I know that you're not sitting here saying, even though you were raised by hippies, you're not saying that, I'm here to just give to the industry, right? What I think is really exciting about what we're doing at this podcast is that we're bringing people onto the podcast who are values driven and who are also interested in making money, but not at the expense of other people. There's not all money is money. And the people who I talk to on this podcast are people who like to have the conversations about there is a really decent way to be a capitalist. There is a really decent way to do things, and you're an example of that, Caleb. And it's been a real joy to watch you as you have grown as a person building this business, and to watch you, do things differently than perhaps you did it previously, and to inspire so many people. So I'm really, as I said, really proud of what you're doing. because I
thank you,
think that you're
man.
setting the future for what the next generation also gets to do. So which is really great.
I greatly appreciate it. That's very kind.
You're welcome. So we're talking about, in this whole series, we're talking about the new normal for coffee roasters. And particularly we're focusing on purchasing green coffee. With all the volatility that's going on in many different layers in the industry these days, this is a very, very important conversation. Because if you're not paying attention to how things are changing, you're going to get left behind. Everything is moving very quickly, and for many different reasons. That doesn't seem like it's going to be changing in the future, or at least the near future, Caleb. We could previously depend on some things being kind of boring and staying the same on the consuming end of the market, but coffee producers have had it really, really tough for a long, long time, because all of that kind of consistency has been at the expense of the coffee producer. Just
For
like
sure.
you have changed, coffee producers are changing. And coffee producers are saying, we're not putting up with this anymore.
Mm.
And the volatility that's going to continue to come from people becoming more aware and conscious and informed about how things are going is going to, I think, extend out the amount of time that we're going to have to get used to the new normal. In that, how, in your mind, do coffee roasters approach this volatility and see it as a time of learning and excitement and adaptability rather than being scared of it?
It is very easy to be scared of it. I would be lying if I said, as a coffee roaster who's traditionally bought coffee at $1.20 USD per pound, that I'm not scared of it. I am. It is changing, and it is a change in the sector that, like we said, there's increasing frequency of volatility in price, in all the things we've discussed in this supply chain, quality of crop, environmental, all these things. There's just more frequency of this volatility. It's important to understand, as a coffee roaster, what are some of the things that are driving this, and why, in my opinion, particularly, I perceive that this volatility might not be going away overnight. We're kind of in a new market, and we're having to stay here. So the drivers that I see that we have to be aware of is there's two big categories that I would like to highlight and kind of almost use as a justification of why I believe and why I see volatility and this market shift having not the opportunity to go back overnight. Like, we're going to be here now for a while, and we have to figure out how to survive as a coffee roaster and as a green coffee buyer. The two things is the demand of traceability and data in our supply chain is only increasing and is actually creating a really challenging flow and cost-effective, kind of cost pressure in our supply chain. So I know you've talked about it on the podcast and touched on it previously with the EUDR regulations, the European deforestation regulations, which is really challenging because I think and this is a little bit of a societal claim, but I think in society we can say something's either good or bad. I think this has both aspects to it. And in an intent to come out of the European Union to say we want no product accounting for deforestation to be imported. Amazing. That is an amazing goal. That is an amazing thing to have. But the implications of how we're actually going to put that in is very, from what I'm seeing in the coffee supply chain, is very detrimental to the smallest end of our supply chain, which is our smallholder producers, which there are tens of millions, hopefully there's still tens. I haven't looked at the stats recently, but there is a big percentage of our supply chain which is held up by smallholder producers. And when a piece of regulation like this comes in, it's in good intent from a Western culture that then gets pushed down a supply chain and creates, a bit of a disconnect from the actual producer. So that is going to increase volatility, in my opinion, towards the end of this year, with potential pre-purchases prior to this coming in, and then the influx, and then like that being the influx. And then after this comes in, maybe the change of demand from European roasters or European importers of where they can get their coffee, which naturally is going to put volatility in our market again. The other thing is growing markets. So the coffee consumption market is still growing. Statistically, there is still a growth in consumption of coffee. Where is it growing? So maybe in traditional Western cultures where we've built our pricing models on this $1.20 USD per pound, maybe that is kind of being challenged a little bit more. But when we're seeing some things like, for example, China just signed an MOU agreement with the Brazilian government, which basically just secured them 500 million worth of green coffee. We've seen China go in 1 year, their coffee consumption has gone from the 20th largest Brazilian consumer to the 6th largest. So they're growing the market on record highs. They're not waiting for it to go back to $1.20. So we're seeing this change of where people are purchasing, which is for me showing that, Asia is becoming a very big player on green coffee consumption, and we need to be aware of that. And those volatilities and those foundations that are changing is why the market isn't going to drop back to 120 tomorrow. And the fact that those things have changed and those things will continue to happen is why you as a roaster need to be willing to draw the line and say, okay, I've got to start today. I've got to start planning. I've got to start budgeting. I've got to start forecasting, because I fear that if we don't do this as coffee roasters around the world, there will be consolidation, and it will be consolidation of small hold roasters, and the independence and the diversity that we see in the roasting market at the moment could very well be stripped down really quickly if we don't build the resources to actually kind of manage and plan for our green coffee consumption.
And that MOU is a perfect example. MOU is Memorandum of Understanding, folks. And basically, that wasn't an MOU directly between China and Brazil. That was an MOU between Luckin, which
Correct.
is, right? And so that's the exact consolidation that Caleb's talking about. When Luckin goes to Brazil and says, we're going to sign an MOU for a fucking massive amount of coffee, right? With Brazil looking at the EUDR and them having a massive deforestation situation, it is easier for them to lean into an MOU with a country that doesn't have an EUDR and just decide to send more of that coffee in that direction instead of towards Europe. And all of this is about the consolidation. For those who don't know what we mean by the consolidation, why don't you deep dive into that a little bit more, Caleb? And first of all, help people understand what consolidation means and then what it looks like in the market.
For sure. So I'm foreseeing consolidation on both ends of our supply chain, and consolidation is largely the smaller operators or the more independent operators being acquired or purchased and kind of taken over by larger operators in the sector. So for example, with the deforestation regulation, if smallhold producers don't have the capabilities to meet these requirements, they could very easily be acquired by a larger entity that has the capabilities to do that. And then they lose their kind of independence of operating how they see fit and kind of selling where they see fit, and they become part of that. From the other end of the supply chain, we see our roasters with the diversity of roasters that we have, where a roaster doesn't have the financial stability to actually survive and to continue purchasing coffee because they haven't adjusted their planning, their forecasting, their budgeting, and their base. Then they get called out when they're, in a scenario where they are falling back on maybe a spot market or something they require, and they physically do not have the liquidity to do that. Then they get acquired by a larger roaster which has the ability to do that. So we're seeing consolidation in that space. I think consolidation is also being seen in cafes, particularly in Australia, where, you'd have 20 cafes on a street because everyone would set them up. But when times get hard, pressure gets hard, cost of living gets hard, inflation goes up, if you didn't have the right foundation and the right budgeting and the right structure, then you will be consolidated. So we're seeing consolidation across the board in the coffee supply chain. And I wholeheartedly believe that is detrimental to the longevity, the diversity, and the overall benefit of our supply chain from both sides.
Why?
I think it's down to the fact that independence allows a more competitive market, a more diverse market, and more opportunity for growth and expansion, and then also more, what's the right word? I would describe it as more creativity, but also more, it's not the right word, trust, but it's that sense that if we have more smaller operators, we have more opportunity. So like if we limit the opportunity to become a coffee roaster, we limit the opportunity to become a coffee producer, we're closing off who can enter our market and who can help grow our market. Coffee consumption is growing. We need more people to be producers. We need these people. We need more like sustainable coffee roasters. We need more sustainable cafes. So like if we close and consolidate this, then we're not allowing new people to enter our market in the future. And we're kind of putting up barriers to join the industry.
And now you're talking about power structures, right? Like that's what happens there. Do you want to talk a little bit more about why that is important to decentralize some of this power, and what happens when you have a centralized and consolidation is essentially the centralization of power. So why is that a problem? What can it have?
I can talk to an extremely Australian example, because we have one of the most consolidated just countries in the world. So if we look at our supermarkets, there is a big highlight on the Australian supermarket. We have basically a duopoly where I think it's over 75% of all supermarkets are owned by two companies in Australia. And that is creating a price gouging, and there's a lot of things happening at the moment to try and review this and strip back the power that they've gained in this time. But it's basically allowing in our grocery market in Australia, our two largest providers are price gouging the consumer and price gouging and underpaying the producers of fruit and veg and other raw products in country, because they have the power. If we don't buy it off you, no one will. And they're leveraging that power to make a disproportion that affects the smallholders on either end of it, and creates that really detrimental structure for an entire sector. And in Australia, it's extremely highlighted. We have it in banking. We have it in supermarkets. It's across the board. The privatization of sector,
all of it.
Yeah, 100%. Like it's rife. And once again, it's we can see here in Australia how that has a detrimental effect for a consumer, for a participant in that supply chain when there is that extreme consolidation. And it's not. In the coffee sector, we're not too far gone. I wholeheartedly do not believe we're too far at all. And it's not that anyone's sitting there right now going, we're going to do it. We're trying to do it. It's the nature that happened when we create this friction, and when we don't have the ability for the smaller players in a market to adapt and to innovate and to have access to technology and new techniques to move with an industry, they get pushed out. And then it gets to a point where they get pushed out, and then it lands with, a couple of large operators. And we see those scenarios.
Well, and I would say that there are people that are sitting back and watching what's happening. I get tapped on the shoulder on a regular basis of people saying to me, if you ever hear of coffee producers that are looking to sell their land, we will buy everything. And the reason... And folks, you should know the reason is because agricultural land is shrinking. Property developers are buying agricultural land and they're turning it into hotels, particularly because where coffee is grown is usually fucking gorgeous, right? Yeah. And so people are looking to convert that land into hotels, high rises, whatever it is. And so if we shrink the amount of land that is available to grow coffee on, we are creating more volatility of supply in the future. Then it's not about quality. Then it's not about logistics. It's not about anything like that. It's about the fact that we simply don't have enough land to grow coffee on that is a viable proposition for coffee producers. Now we've got another problem.
Yeah, it also comes to the value of what crop gets put on. And so,
exactly.
Is it sustainable for coffee at $1.20 USD a pound?
And now we go back to eucalyptus. Right?
Is it still valuable enough to be put in the ground? And it's about, and this is a big vision that we have. This is why we describe ourselves as an agricultural software provider, because we see the whole agricultural supply chain for coffee particularly requiring access to technology. Because if there was the foundation, and if there's a digital foundation that we can have a singular language and a single communication channel where we can transmit this, value through data, then we have the opportunity that a producer could, in the future, plug in their information to prove their deforestation regulation, rather than having to sign it off to an entity that then owns the data about their land.
That's amazing.
They should have the right to own the data about their land. And we're not there. We've got a long road to go. But it is important to know that we need a digital foundation for supply chains to remain for the smallholder, be it roaster, be it producer. We need digital foundations for that to happen. And we think the lack of access to technology, the barrier to entry of building technology like this for an individual entity creates those scenarios for consolidation. So if we can lower the entry and say, we're going to build it for everyone and we're going to make it super accessible and super cost effective for everyone to get access, then we can actually help, certain parts of the supply chain continue to evolve and continue to survive in these times.
I'm very glad that it's someone that has your head and your heart that is a part of, that's the CEO of a business like this. And this is why it's important for people to understand that, yes, you should be in business to make money, but not every business that's in business to make money is doing the right thing. And I think that if you're in business to make money, as well as many other currencies, like increasing the access that people have to data and increasing the longevity of another person's business, or increasing the runway of what our industry has, all of these things are what turns somebody from a business owner into a visionary. And this is what's important for us to back more and more these days. So Caleb, it's been a real honor to have you on the podcast for the first time. I look forward to us tracking Greensquare's success over the years and its evolution and the way it's going to move forward. I hope you'll come back so that we can document the history of the way that your brain's working over the coming decades. And if you wouldn't mind letting people know where they can get in contact with you and with Greensquare.
Yeah, for sure. Well, firstly, Lee, thank you so much for the time and the lovely
My
words.
pleasure.
It's always great to have an opportunity to kind of share our perspective of what we're working on. If anyone wants to learn any more, or if you have any questions, we're an open resource. We are only available for the Australian market at the moment. But you can follow along at greensquare.co on Instagram and LinkedIn, and then also www.greensquare.co online for all our website details.
Amazing. We'll have links in the show notes. I definitely recommend you following the Instagram reels. Same reels are on LinkedIn. They're just easy to understand, bite-sized kinds of, like, just real information. It's not about, I don't know, flexing or anything like that. It's just real information that's really well put together.
A lot of them are driven by people reaching out with a question. So like a lot of people, because we don't have an education structure or a system, might go, hey, what does that mean? Someone mentioned this or someone mentioned this. So ask questions. We're an open resource. We'll answer it for you and we'll answer it for everyone. And it's all completely independent. Like you won't get named out that this person asked this question. We just answer questions for people who are looking to know more about buying and managing green gold.
Amazing. Thank you again. Would you do me the honor of signing off our episode for us?
Peace, love, and peanut butter.
Have an amazing rest of your day, everyone. Bye. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, friends. Please don't forget to show us some love by subscribing, liking, commenting, and most of all, sharing this podcast with your friends. Check the show notes for links, including our sponsors and our Patreon. And stay tuned for more great conversations on the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward.